Welcome to the Fi Guys podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the 9-step plans to financial freedom brought to you by the new book, Millionaire Mission. So please join us today as we go over these 9 steps. Let's get started. So Dominic, today we're going to be going over the new book, Millionaire Mission, which is actually a book that was written by the Money Guys, who is another financial podcast just like us. And they're actually 2 financial planners who brought on a podcast very similar to what we're kind of doing here. So whenever a new book comes out from someone who's doing this well, financial planning, financial advising, financial coaching, my goal is always to try to read them as quickly as I possibly can to see what can I steal from what they're doing in their business and incorporate it into Monzon Wealth, because it's selfish for me, but it works a lot better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for those that don't know, Monzon Wealth is your financial company, correct?
Yep. Just that's my little one and works well. But I've always thought, I think there's a lot of people who say like, Chris, like you're just stealing other people's ideas. Well, it's the same thing that Warren Buffett does, Mohnish Pabrai. All they do is they copy or they clone the best investors in the world. So why should I sit there and try to reinvent the wheel when there are other advisors out there who come up with great financial plans that I can just steal from? And of course, there's going to be things I disagree with, things I agree with. So for today's podcast, what we're going to do is I'm going to present you the Money Guys in Millionaire Mission's book, the 9-step financial plan that they put out. And then on Friday's podcast, we'll go ahead and go deeper into it. We'll pick it apart, see what we like, see what we don't like. But I say we kind of get into that. How's that sound?
Absolutely. I'm excited to get into this. I love a good 9-step plan. Nothing better.
Mm-hmm. And I do like to preface this is that this is a financial plan. This is not the financial plan or your financial plan. But it's always good to hear different orders of operations, different systems, different ways of strategizing. How am I going to save my money? Once I save my money, where am I going to put my money? And just because you hear this, you say, oh, I don't think step 1 should be there. I think step 1 should be at step 3. Step 3 should be at step 1. That's what makes personal finance personal. So hear what they have to say, because they are successful financial advisors. And my understanding from reading their book is that this isn't just a 9-step that they just kind of made up willy-nilly by asking some guy in the parking lot, how did you become financially independent? This is something that is tried and true by working with a bunch of different financial planning individuals and then seeing what actually worked for them. So the 9 steps are, first off, we're going to cover our deductibles. We're going to get the employer match. We're going to knock out high interest debt, get an emergency fund, start investing in your Roth or HSA, max out your employer plan, hyperaccumulate, prepay future expenses, and then prepay low interest debt. Now, I know I said a lot there, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into each one step by step, talk about what that means for you, and then we'll kind of go into it.
Please. Yeah, please.
Okay.
I already forgot most of the steps, so let's get right into it. What was step 1? What do we got?
So step number 1 is deductibles covered. So as we know, 40% of Americans can't come up with $400 to cover a medical emergency or any kind of emergency. So the first step that the Money Guys talk about is making sure that we have enough money to at least cover our deductibles. Now, for me, at Monzon Wealth, I've always said $1,000. We want to save up $1,000 inside that crisis fund that we've talked about before.
Yeah.
But they've taken a little bit different of a step. They've said rather than $1,000, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and find all of our insurances. So whether that be health, car, homeowner insurance, all of them. We're going to list out what's the deductibles on there. If your highest deductible is $500, the first step is to have $500 in cash or in a liquid asset that you have access to.
Okay. Would you recommend like a high yield savings too?
I certainly would. So that's always a good question, right? Is, okay, Chris, I have this cash saved up. What do I do with it? Should I put it in stocks? Should I put it in bonds? Should I do this or that? My thing is either we're going to keep it inside of a money market account or we're going to want to put it into a high yield savings account. Or if you want to like not be as optimized, just put into your checking or your savings account at your normal bank. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people, they underestimate the power of having cash on hand. They'll sit there and they'll be like, oh, I have all this like cash in my bank account, but it's not being optimized to the nth degree. And money's kind of like air in that perspective, in that it's not important until you can't breathe.
Yeah.
Money isn't important until you find yourself in that situation.
And you don't have it.
And then you realize like, oh, thank God. Thank God I have that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good analogy. I do love me some air, and I very much need some money. So they both go hand in hand. So, okay, so we're talking about covered deductibles. So have a little bit on hand, cover the deductibles and whatnot, 500 to 1,000.
Yep. So Yep. So some questions you might be asking is, well, how much do I have to save?
Yeah.
And in order to find that out, is it a 500? Is it 1,000? Is it 250? Again, first you need to find all of your insurance premiums. So look at your health, look at your car, look at your homeowners. Whichever one of those has the highest deductible, that's the one that we're going to shoot for. So if you have a homeowner's insurance and you have a $500 deductible, you have normal medical insurance with a $500 deductible, but you have a car insurance with a $1,000 deductible, you're going to want to save $1,000. That's step number one. And then you might ask, well, Chris, why not just go for the lowest deductible? Why not go for one of the $500 ones? Well, because if you do have that emergency where you have to sell out $1,000, you only have $500, it's pretty easy math to see, okay, I can see where this could be an issue.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So that's simple enough. I can do that.
Yep. I would hope so.
Me too. Me too. Okay, so we love
step
simple.
number one is,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but like the simpler it is, the better, the easier to implement. Because like if you're talking to me like, yo, okay, so what you want to do is XYZ, XYZ, and then invest in this, and then do this, and then make sure that it's doing this. I'm like, Chris, I'm dying over here. This is compound overload. But I love that the first step to this very easy 9-step plan is just save. Save a little 500 to 1,000 in your crisis fund for deductibles.
in your crisis fund, but that's also going to be at the deductible. Because I think there's a lot of people out there that say, first off, you need to save $1,000 or $500 or whatever it is. Yeah. And then people they get hung up on like, okay, I'm just going to save $500 or $250 or whatever they hear someone say first. But that $500 might not be the right amount for you. And the nice thing about having something that you're pairing it to your insurance and whatever the highest deductible is. That way, you know, if you have some catastrophic emergency, like you get in a car wreck, okay, my deductible is $1,000 to get my car fixed and to get me repaired. All I need is to have $1,000. Then I can move on to step 2.
Interesting. Okay. So do you want to move on to step 2?
Yeah. Step 2 is get your 401k employer match. So we've talked about this before, right? 401k match is a 100% return on your money. Yep. So if you're getting a 3% match for as much as you contribute to your 401k, you'd be silly to be like, I don't really want free money. I'm not going to do that. So at least get that. If it's 1%, get 1%, 2%, get 2%, 5%, get that 5% match. Whatever the match is, get up to it.
Heck yeah. 5%, that's high, right? That's pretty high in the world of matches.
Oh yeah. I think the average is like 3.
Okay. If they match at all.
If they match at all. So that might be a question that someone might ask is like, well, Chris, what if there is no employer match? If there's no employer match, if you don't have a 401k at work or the employer isn't matching anything, you can make the decision to either skip this step entirely and move to step 3, or you can contribute whatever amount that you want to. But I would say at this point, if your employer doesn't have a match or anything like that, let's skip to step number 3 and we'll continue to work down the thing.
Okay, 8-step plan now. Okay, that's simple enough. Like you said, free money. Yeah. When you go and invest, this would be in your 401k, right? The employer would match 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5% if you're super, super lucky. Okay. Simple enough.
And that could be a 401k, a 403b, a TSP, whatever your employer match is. So remember, there are different names for these accounts depending on where you work for. So look into that. If your employer matches anything in retirement, at least get that match in step 2. And then another thing that I always like to talk about whenever we're talking about 401ks is remember the vesting periods. And we've talked about vesting periods before. Typically, you have to work at a establishment for a certain amount of time for them to give you whatever that match was. So if you work at a place for 1 year, they might give you 25% of what they've matched for your investments. If you work there for 2 years, 50%, 3 years, 75%, 4 years. If you leave that company, you get 100% of what they matched you. So look at the vesting periods, because sometimes if someone has a vesting period of like 10 years or 5 years, but you know I'm only going to be at this employer for the next year or 2 because I know I'm going to be moving, well, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to try to say like, I need to get this money matched, knowing that I might not get any of it in the long run because I'm not going to stay with the company long enough.
It's very interesting. That makes sense. Yeah, it's something a lot of people don't think about. I know when you first brought it up to me many podcasts ago, you mentioned vesting period. I'm like, I've never even heard of vesting period. And then you're telling me like, oh yeah, it's kind of an incentive to keep the employee on. Interesting. It's so interesting.
Yep. So something to think about that. Maybe if you're not going to be staying at a place for too long, maybe we should skip step and you know you're not going to get that match anyways, maybe we skip step 2 and go straight to step 3. This is what makes personal finance personal. And this is why the Money Guys 9-step plan is a financial plan, but not the financial plan for everyone. And that's why it's sometimes really good to work with a financial advisor to find what is the right plan for you. Because this 9-step plan, I think it's good. It'll work for most people, but it might not work for you in your specific situation. But you can always customize it, right? That's what's nice about it. So step number 3, we need to take out high interest debt.
Okay, credit card debt, I'm assuming.
Yep. So high interest is going to be credit cards in this one. So question someone might ask is like, well, Chris, like, does a mortgage count as high interest debt? No, a mortgage doesn't count. Maybe someone would say like, Chris, does like student loans count as a high interest debt? I would say anything sub a 7% interest rate would not constitute high interest debt. So what I'm thinking about here is going to be like personal loans, credit card debt. Maybe if you had like a really, really bad credit score and you had to get a car loan at like 10 or 12 or 13%, yeah, you're going to want to pay those off first and foremost, because in the market, you can expect to return around 7 to 9%. But if you have credit card debt that's eating you away at 20 or 30% interest per year, it's like running a marathon with a leash on your back.
20% is crazy. 15% is crazy. 12% is crazy. Wow.
Yeah. So I think it's really important that we prioritize repaying debt. I think there's so many people that say like, well, Chris, I think it's more important that I continue to save money for my future and invest in everything. And that's all well and good, but it's going to be really hard to invest all of your money in the future when you're trying to compound your money at 9%, knowing that you have this other debt somewhere else that's growing at 20 to 25%. Because remember the rule of 72, Dominic?
Mm-hmm. How long it takes for your money to double?
Yep. So we know that it takes our money to double. Let's say in the market, if we get a 7% return, which is, pretty moderate, if divided by 7, it takes us 10.2 years to double our money to go from $100 to $200. Well, the rule of 72 also works in reverse, and it can hurt us when it comes to credit card debt. So let's say that our credit card debt is 30%. Okay. Actually, let's go with 30%.
Okay.
Well, 30% divided by 72 is what? 2.5, something like that, 2.2. Mm-hmm. That means that your credit card debt is doubling every 2.2 years, given that you have like a 20 or 30% interest rate. So this can really negatively hurt you too if you don't think about that. The rule of 72 can also be your enemy if it's not on the right side of the ledger.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that. I've always heard like the rule of 72 in a positive way, compounding interest with your money in the market or whatever. But I never thought about it in regards to the interest charged to you. How interesting.
Yeah. So there's people who have like student loans, right?
Yeah.
And then you can always defer if you have federal student loans for a long time. You can defer not making payments. So I've had people who have said like, oh, I'm just deferring my student loans like indefinitely. Well, what happens is your student loans was $100,000 and you have a 7% interest rate. 10 years later, now it's $200,000. 10 years later, now it's $400,000. 10 years later, now it's $800,000. And now someone's getting to retirement and they're trying to cash out of their Social Security or something like that. And now the Social Security is saying, hey, you owe us $800,000 for your student loans. And someone's saying, no, it was only $100,000. Well, no, it was compounding at 7% per year for the past 40 years. Now it's $800,000.
Dude, that's a bad situation to be. That's a real story?
Yeah, that happens all the time.
My God. That's wild. So don't defer. Pro tip, don't defer for that long.
Oh, it depends. It depends on the situation. But yeah, I would typically say at least try to make at least the interest payments.
Gotcha.
Typically try not to defer, especially if you have federal student loans. And this is getting off topic, but if you do have federal student loans and you defer after 20 or 25 years, depending on what repayment plan you're on, you're up for forgiveness of the loan. If you defer at any point, that could reset the clock. Meaning that the 20 years resets from that time that you start deferring again. So it's best to just make the minimum payments every time.
Yeah.
But that's a completely different podcast. Yeah. There are like 4 different repayment plans that are federal. It gets deep real fast. We could talk about that maybe in a future podcast. But there are other people who are far better experts than I am there. But step number 3, is to take care of all high interest credit card debt. You don't want to continue to run this financial independence marathon if you know you have a giant leech on your back that's just sucking your blood dry. So get rid of that leech before we start running.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. That's why it's number 3, eliminating the high interest debt. Yeah. Can't outrun it.
All right. Step number 4 is build your emergency fund. So what I recommend and what the money guys recommend is having at least 3 to 6 months of emergency fund ready to go, also in a somewhat liquid account. Typically that's going to be like a money market account, maybe like a safe bond fund, short-term bonds, something like that, but something that is very easily accessible. You typically want to have this money on hand within 48 hours. So if you need to sell a fund, like a bond fund or something like that, to have that money within 48 hours, that's cool. This is separate from our deductible fund, which should be in a high yield savings account. You should have that immediately to you. Like
instant.
Money is in my account. I should buy it, whatever.
Okay. So the emergency funds could be, would you be against having the emergency funds in like a S&P 500, like mutual fund?
Yes.
You'd be against that?
Yep. Oh yeah, 100%.
Because it's not
think about
liquid
this
enough, or what's the thought process behind that?
Well, think about it this way. Okay, so let's say you decide, Chris, I'm gonna, for where you are in your life right now, I only want to have 3% or 3 months of living expenses.
Okay.
Financial catastrophe happens. Market's down 50%. Dominic, hey, we like you here at your work.
Gotcha.
You know, we're lucky here at your work, but we're gonna need to fire you right now. Okay, well, it's okay. I have my emergency fund. You go to the stock market, it's also down 50%. So now you only have a month and a half.
Gotcha.
Of emergency fund left. That's why you don't want to put it inside the stock market.
Damn. That makes a lot of sense. Damn. Okay. You got me on that one. That makes a lot. I love when you give me a logical answer that I can like process. I'm like, oh, now I know. That's perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so you're just saying like keep the emergency fund in as liquid as possible, or as semi-liquid as possible.
As liquid as possible. I mean, high yield savings accounts are great here. There are like bond funds that are really good that are safe if you're going to be. They're called muni bonds, so municipal bonds. They're usually tax free as well. So there's a bunch of different things we can go into there. It's something I would definitely recommend reaching out to your financial advisor or reaching out to a financial professional and finding out what's going to be right for you there. But if you have no idea, just a high yield savings account at like Allied or Wealthfront or one of those online banks that are offering 2 or 3%, 4%, even, that's probably going to be a good place to put that money. Because again, money on hand is like oxygen. We don't care about it until we are under the water. Then we care a lot about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep. And step number 4 is really important because this is where we really make sure that all of our financial house is in order. Because in order for us to calculate what is 3 months, what is 6 months of expenses, we need to know what 1 month of expenses is. So if I tell you, Dominic, I need you to save 3 or 6 months of expenses, so how much do you normally spend in a month? And you're like, I don't freaking know. Like
somewhere between
$100, maybe $100,
200 trillion billion, something up there.
Yeah, it's something around there. Well, this is very important. We want to make sure that we have the right amount for you. So you need to start tracking and knowing what that's going to be for you. So that's really important. And then 3 to 6 months, that's only going to be 3 to 6 months for people that are younger, that are on the path of financial independence. And again, this is what makes personal finance personal. I have clients that are retired now, and they have a year to 2 years of straight cash in their bank accounts, checkings or their high yield savings account. Because when they're retired, they're far more worried about volatility when they're in the stock market than we are as young people. For me, if my wife like lost her job or something like that, we only have like 6 months of emergency fund, and that's because I'm already pretty cautious. I'm a very cautious person, but that's what's right for us. There are other people that have a year, other people that have 3 months. So what's going to be right for you is going to be dependent on what kind of people are dependent on you. Do you have kids? If you have kids and stuff like that, and you're a single family household or a single income family household, you probably want to go farther out. But if you're a dual family household, you and a spouse, and you don't have any kids, you could probably go to 3 months. Again, personal finance is personal, so choose what's going to be right for you.
Gotcha. More dependents you have, the more money you'd probably want to have as well. Makes sense.
So that's step number 4. Build up that emergency fund. Step 5, we want to start maxing out our Roth IRAs and our HSAs.
Gotcha.
So do you remember what the Roth IRA is?
Yeah, it's the non-taxable account for the stock market. You can put about 7,000 per year in it.
Yeah, I think this year it's 7,000.
Okay.
Yes, for 2024.
And then the HSA is the health savings account, which my dad has drilled into me because he loves, I mean, loves with a capital H, with a capital L, his health savings accounts. Every time he goes to the dentist,
they
it's
are
like an
great.
out of pocket. He's like, oh, I can charge this back. Congratulations.
Yep. They are great. Just remember, in order to contribute to a health savings account, you have to have a high deductible plan that has an HSA component attached to it. So you have to look at that. And again, you could reach out to a financial planner or reach out to even your HR representative and say, is a health savings account right for me? Because if you're someone who's going to the doctors every single day, maybe you have, I don't know, diabetes or something like that, and your deductibles are going to be really, really high in this year, having a health savings account might not be the right thing for you because you're going to have a much higher deductible than someone with a traditional PPO.
Yeah, absolutely.
So think about that. And then for people who are maybe phased out of Roth income limits, and good job for the Roth. Yeah, a Roth is a qualified account. And what that means is you put money in this year. You tell Uncle Sam, like, hey, Uncle Sam, daddy government, I put $7,000 into my Roth IRA. Tax me for that $7,000 now so that in 20, 30, 40 years, when I take it out, the money that I put in plus the growth, I get to take out tax free and never have to talk to you guys about it again. So there are some. Oh, yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Paying taxes is the worst.
I love it. It really is. So there are some things that are going to be difficult. There are some people, and I find myself in this category, who actually can't contribute directly to a Roth IRA because my income is too high to contribute. So for that, there's always a backdoor Roth strategy. And that's something that, again, we've talked about on previous podcasts. And if you're trying to figure that out, I would always recommend reaching out to a financial advisor or your financial institution to figure that out yourself, because if you mess it up, you mess it up pretty big. So make sure that you're doing it the right way.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. And then one thing that I always like to talk about for your HSA, your health savings account, your dad's currently retired.
Yes.
So it's actually makes sense for him to use his HSA now. But for other people who have a health savings account, I typically recommend not using your health savings account to pay for co-pays and to pay for things currently. Because if you put that money in, you didn't have to pay taxes on it. The growth on that is also not going to be taxed. If you use it in the future for qualified medical expenses, it will also not be taxed. So it is triple tax advantaged. So if you put $3,000 in, just due to the rule of 72, let's say you put $3,000 in this year, that 3 in 10 years, in 10 years will be 6. That 6 goes to 12. That 12 goes to 24. The 24 goes to 48. So, whatever it is, in 40 years, 50 years, you could have $48,000 that you could take out of your HSA that you have not paid any taxes on ever.
Really?
Triple tax advantage.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know you could take the money out. Like, I know you could pay for it, like medical stuff, but I didn't realize you could take it out.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you can take it out. All you need to do is have a medical receipt. So what I do, when I used to have an HSA, I don't have an HSA anymore, but I still have an HSA account that's still building that I have never used. So whenever I have a medical expense for me, I keep a receipt in Google, in Google, and then I keep a drive of all of my receipts. So in 20, 30, 40 years, whenever it's time for me to go back, I can go back and say, hey, HSA account, a long time ago, I had this root canal and I spent $1,000 for it. I want to take my $1,000 out of this $100,000 in my HSA rather than the $10,000 that's in there right now.
Okay. So it's not just like a blanket pull. You actually have to have the receipts to actually pull from it.
Yeah, but you can have those receipts, and there are currently no IRS limits on to how old those receipts have to be. So I could, when I'm 70 years old, pull out something from my HSA for something that I did when I was 20.
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
It takes some.
And you're also getting the benefit of inflation.
Yeah.
And you're getting the benefit of it's been triple tax advantage and growing this entire time.
So when you pull it out, it's not taxed. Not taxed at all.
Nope.
You think they'll
Pretty
tax
cool,
it in the future?
So HSA is probably not, no, because it's going to be grandfathered under the law. They won't be able to. Now they might get rid of HSAs. They might get rid of them, but I really doubt it because not many people, like using an HSA and doing what I just said there, that's a pretty high level. Not many people are doing that. They may get rid of the Roth IRA though. That is something that is on the chopping blocks. And that's why the money guys and me at Mons and Wealth, we really try to say maxing out your Roth IRA is a good idea because we don't know how long you have that for. Now, when it comes to your 401k, should we do a traditional or a Roth 401k? That's where some individual variance might be found. I personally used to do a traditional because there's also a backdoor Roth. Again, we can talk about that another time, but there are always different ways of doing this. But that's what makes this, the Money Guys 9-step plan, a financial plan, not the financial plan. And as you can see, this gets pretty complicated. So sometimes working with an individual to figure out your specific risk tolerances, your specific situation might be the best thing for you.
And in order to have a Roth, you have to have a job, correct?
Yes. In order to contribute to any IRA, you have to have earned income.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. But unlike a 401k, so maybe you work for a place, you're only part-time, you don't have benefits to a 401k. That's okay. You can still open up an IRA, which is individual retirement account. You can open that traditional or Roth. Just remember, you can never go over the limits of what it is. So if 2024, if it's $7,000, that means between a traditional and a Roth IRA, I can only contribute $7,000. So if I want to put $3,500 into my Roth, I can only put $3,500 to my traditional. I can't put $7,000 into each.
And how closely are they watching that?
I would not test the IRS.
They can come get it, actually. No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
Well, I mean, whenever you put the money into it, that financial institution sends, it's called I can't remember the tax form, but they send a tax form to the IRS saying Dominic put this much money into the to his HSA now, or to his IRA. Now, if you get audited one year, which I will admit the statistics of you getting audited is very, very low, but if it does happen and they look back and they say, hey, Dominic, 2 years ago, you put $7,000 into a traditional IRA and $7,000 into a Roth IRA, you can't do that. You need to take out $7,000 and all the growth, and you're going to pay penalties on those for doing that. So, your miles may vary. There may be people who are putting a bunch of money into their IRAs, but if it gets caught, even if it gets caught 40 years in the future, they can still go back and retroactive take it away from you.
Yeah.
So, plus that and penalties and fees and just the headache of thinking I could do it. It's not worth it.
It's better just to put the 7,000 in one of them, and then the other 7,000 that you would have invested into traditional account, just a regular account, right?
Well, let's move on to step number 6.
I love it.
That's a good question.
Let's do it.
So step number 6 is max out your employer plan. So what do we do with that extra money? So say we put the $7,000 to our Roth IRA. We also put the $3,500 into our HSA. We've now just saved $10,000 for our retirement. The next step in step 6 is we want to max out our employer plan. Now for us in this year, that means $24,000. So I know what you might be saying. So Chris, you're basically, the money guys are telling me I'm supposed to save $35,000 a year. And I kind of thought that was crazy too. But what they do say is it caps out at 25%. If you're saving 25% of your income into employer-sponsored plans, then we should move on to step number 7. So someone making $60,000 a year, obviously maxing out all of your IRA, all of your HSA, and all of your employer match, that's going to take away more than half your income. That's not sustainable in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. But someone making $100,000 or $200,000, that's a very different situation. They can max all those out and not even feel it that bad of an issue. So that's where they say is to do that. So might that be a 401k, a TSP, 403b? Max those out if you possibly can, up to 25% of your income. After that, you can choose to either continue to move to step number 6, or you can move on to step number 7.
Okay. Interesting.
And the reason for that is I've met clients in the past who they let the tax plan wag the dog, meaning that they were so over optimized in taxes and trying to save on taxes that they're millionaires on paper, but they have no money. They can't even buy a car. And the reason for that is all of their money is in qualified expenses, or all in qualified accounts, like your 401k, like your IRA, but they're not 59 and a half. They're only 50, 40. So they can't even touch that money. So it's really important that we make sure that we make our plan to us. If our plan doesn't have to deal with keeping all of our money locked up till we're 59 and a half, maybe we should look at saving it in other qualified or other places.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. That's a weird spot to be in, to have money and you can't touch it. Not that you can't touch it. It's just that you're going to get taxed on it when you do touch it.
You get taxed and penalized. Yep.
Interesting.
So that's something you really need to be cautious of. And then there are some things you need to think about. Maybe your 401k, maybe the investment options are just really bad. I've seen some 401ks where all they have are like 3 options and they're all high load mutual funds. And like for that is, I'm going to tell my client, like, let's avoid that because you're going to end up paying more fees in this than it's worth it. So how about we move on to step number 7 for that person?
Yeah.
Another strategy is there's also a mega backdoor Roth strategy that we can do for the 401k too. We're not going to talk about that today. We can talk about that in another podcast, but there are other strategies we can always implement in order to get more money into a Roth.
Absolutely.
But remember that this caps out at 25%. If we're saving 25% of our income that's going to qualified accounts, meaning that we can't touch them till we're 59.5, then we should maybe move on to step number 7, but your individual mileage may vary. You might say, Chris, I want to save 50% of my income to qualified expenses because later on I'm going to do a Roth conversion. And I know if I do a Roth conversion, all I have to do is wait 5 years and I can take that out tax-free. If you tell me that, I'm going to say, you've thought this through, do what you're going to think about. That's what I'm doing personally. But that is an advanced move that you probably need a financial advisor or financial planner helping you and checking everything out, and a CPA to make sure you do it right.
Yeah, because you don't want to fudge anything up when it comes to stuff like that. Gotta make sure it's all secure.
No.
T's are crossed, I's are dotted, all that fun stuff.
Yep. I mean, I'm a financial advisor and I go to other professionals to make sure that I'm doing it right. I still have my CPA look over all my stuff before I do this stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Yep. As someone who knows what they're doing, I still have someone do it for me or check it.
Yeah.
Check it
just in case.
So, yep. So after we decided maybe we've maxed out our 401ks or we've reached our limit of 25%, that's where we move on to step number 7, which is hyperaccumulation. So this is where we can invest over 25% of our money. And this is where we really get to do some different things there. Hyperaccumulation means that we're saving additional money for our retirement. And that can be in a qualified or a non-qualified account. So that means that we're just saving money after taxes. So that money is it's already been taxed. We're going to put it into an investment account. If you sell anything, it's getting taxed again. But the nice thing about getting taxed double, even though it does suck, is you have access to that 100% right now. Mm-hmm. You don't have to wait till 59.5. You don't have to wait any amount of period. You can get it today if you need it.
That is a wonderful feature of that. We do love liquidity. Mm-hmm. We do love liquidity.
Yep.
Interesting. So, okay, number 7. That's simple enough. Well, yeah, what were we going to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's just important that at number 7 or number 6 that you start looking to see like where's the right place for me to put this money? Because again, you don't want to put it all into qualified funds where you can't touch it to 59.5, but maybe you don't want to put it all into non-qualified funds where it's always going to be taxed for you either way. So contribute to the right thing for you and just make sure that if you have any questions, you reach out to a financial advisor, financial planner, maybe your HR representative, someone that you can trust to figure out what's going to be right for you there. And then step number 8 is going to be prepay future expenses.
What do you mean by that?
Now I see you look a little confused, right?
Yeah, well,
what does that actually mean? When they said that too, I was like, I don't know what the hell that means, like prepay future expenses. So this might be things like your kid's college, your kid's wedding. Maybe you want to save up for a big car in the future or like a rental house or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's where pre-savings for that. So maybe you look into a 529 plan for your kids. Maybe we're going to start saving stuff like that. And I know some people are like, well, that's not fair. Why should I should save for my kids' college fund before I save for my own retirement and save for myself. But just like on a plane, when those oxygen masks deploy, what's the first thing they say?
Help yourself
put your oxygen mask on yourself first.
And then help others.
And then put it on your kids. It's the same thing when it comes to college. Your kid's going to build up debt in college. And I think it's great when parents are like, I want to pay for my kids' college, and that's all well and good, but what is better to do it? Be able to just take that money out of your accounts and be able to do that for them, or to have nothing for yourself and know that your kid's going to be set to go forever because their debt is going to be relatively low interest. Maybe they don't even go to college. Who really knows? But first you need to take care of yourself because it's going to be much better for your kids in the future if you take care of yourself rather than saying, I'm going to send my kid to college. I'll take care of myself later. And then your retirement plan is basically your kids are going to take care of you. Yeah. It's not a good situation to be in.
That's not a good situation. No, you don't want to burden them You don't want to force their hand like that. It's not. It's not.
Hmm.
It's not great. It's not great. Better to plan for yourself and help them out as much as you can, but you don't want to leave yourself stranded.
Yeah. And if you do this right, and that's the nice thing about how these steps work, if you hyperaccumulate, so you save money in your investment accounts, you can use that money to pay for your kids' things. Maybe you want to pay for a wedding. Well, you can use the money from step 7 to do that. There's always ways to look at this that makes it a little bit easier, but we always need to make sure that we're prioritizing ourselves before we prioritize our kids and saving for them. Because the nicest thing you could do is build up a huge retirement amount of money, have all this money in qualified and non-qualified funds, and then your kid graduates from college, you could just pay it off right there and then.
Yeah, because that debt from school is just so massive for some people. It's absurd. And like you talked about earlier on the podcast, people be deferring it and deferring it, deferring it, and that 100,000 turned into 800,000. And then the government's like, we're not going to give you Social Security. You got to pay off your debt first. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah,
crazy.
it happens.
It happens.
It legitimately happens. And this is where it's really important. I don't think that you have to be debt free in order to like call yourself financially independent, in order to call yourself retired, in order to do any of these things. But you need to be able to pay off that debt at a drop of a hat if you want to. So maybe you're someone who looks at you have a mortgage and your mortgage is at 3%. And you're like, well, Chris, I don't really care that this 3%'s here. You can still be financially independent and have debt. You just have to have the ability to pay that debt off if you made the choice that you wanted to pay it off. Which leads us into step number 9, prepay low interest debt.
Mm.
So after you've accumulated all your money, you've saved up for your retirement, you've saved up for your non-retirement to get you to financial independence faster. You've also saved up for your future expenses, whether that be your kid's wedding, your grandkids' quinceañera, whatever it is. You go ahead and do all those things. Step number 9 is we can prepay low interest debt. And again, this step's going to be for someone who wants to pay it off, and you can choose to do that or not do that. So I would say if you have a mortgage at 3%, financially, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for you to pay that off, because you can make more than double that if you just go into a moderate portfolio in the stock market. But your individual miles may vary. I know there's a lot of headlines out there like the average millionaire pays off their house in 5 years. Well, if you do a little bit deeper digging into that, the average millionaire is in their 50s or 60s. So yeah, for them, they're paying off their house in 5 to 10 years because they're about to retire. But if you're 20 or 30, does it really make sense for you to do that? No. So you have to look at your individual mileage may vary depending on the situation that you're in. Just because you read some headline about millionaires are doing this thing, those millionaires are often going to be in a completely different generation, in a completely different situation than you are. Mm-hmm. So always think about that. And that's why you need to make sure that your personal finance goals and your personal finance recommendations are personalized to you.
Yeah, like you said, it's not the plan, it's just a plan. And I like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for someone who doesn't know where to start. And I'm sure there's definitely stuff in here where, the viewer or even myself were like, I didn't even think about that. Like the hyperaccumulation. When you said that, I was like, what are we talking about here? Or prepaid future expenses. It's something that's like, what? But I like that. I think it's important to put these things on the horizon and really build a plan around it. Because you never know what life's going to throw at you.
You don't. And that's the reason that I like looking at what other financial advisors are doing for their practice and seeing like how are they figuring this out? Because I have a different plan than this. I don't run by this way. I might incorporate some of the things that they've talked about in this. We'll talk about that on 5 Friday feedback, what I like, what I don't like about this plan. But there are always different ways. And once you reach that step 9, you have no remaining debt. You have all this money accumulated. Well, great. You've basically reached the end of the game. And for these guys, there is no step 10, no step 11. And that's okay. You can just go back to step 7 and just keep on accumulating more money, keep on doing whatever you want to do, or just say, hey, I'm financially independent and I'm going to go and pursue whatever it is that I want to whatever I want to do. And we've talked about all of that in excess at this point to figure out what's going to be right for you after you do retire. Yeah. Spoiler alert, it's follow your passions.
Exactly. Well, cool. Well, I like those 9 steps. Those are some great 9 steps. I hope people took some action, took some notes on it, and they got something useful out of it.
Yeah. And just always remember that this is a financial plan that works for many people, but this does not mean that it is the financial plan or your financial plan. That's where it really is important to reach out to a financial advisor or figure out your plan for yourself by doing some education, learning about this stuff so that you know what questions to ask and then what is the next step for you based off of your knowledge. It's very, very important that you figure it out because these 9 steps are generalized, but you are not a general person. You are a specific person.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
our action step for this week is I want you to find where you are in the current 9 areas. So are you currently working on getting your deductibles covered? Are you trying to get your employer match? Do you have high interest debt? Are you trying to figure out your Roth IRA? Are you prepaying for future expenses? If you have no idea what step you're on, then start at step number 1. And I want you to work on that step and continue to try to get 1% better this week in whatever step you're in. Because remember, it's 1% better every week. Just like that 1% better continues to work. If you get 1% better every day, every 72 days, you are 100% better.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Rule of 72.
Yeah. Heck yeah. Yeah. And I was going to say, like, before starting at even the first point, don't forget point 0, which is basically create a budget. You know, what's your income? What's your expenses? Because if you don't know those 2 things, that's like, it's the bread and butter of the whole meal. You got to have those things before you can start as well. Correct? Or am I off?
Yeah. I would probably say at that point where you should probably get the deductible covered. Like I wouldn't tell somebody like, oh, no, don't worry about getting your deductible covered. Don't worry about having any emergency savings until you know how much money you're bringing in and taking out. Like, I think that's silly, right? So I would definitely say like the tracking and everything should probably come at step number 4.
You think so?
When we need to know what is our emergency reserves, it's going to be really difficult to have 3 to 6 months of emergency savings if we don't know what 3 to 6 months of emergency savings is.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel that.
So I think you can do step 1, 2, and 3 without knowing those 2 things. But obviously, knowing how much money you bring in and how much money you have, and I know you use the word that we don't like, budget, but that way you can create a conscious spending plan, knowing where your money's going to go before it hits your account.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so easy nowadays to like track your spending with like apps. Like I spent like 20 minutes dialing in my apps and like my bank accounts, all this fun stuff. And it's just like, bam, this is your income, this is your expense, it's how much you're spending on groceries. I'm like, this is perfect. Perfect. I love it.
And I have an exciting thing. I've been working on setting up a thing with Mons on Wealth, so my clients will get access to a financial tracking tool that I will have access to as well, so that my clients will be able to have access to that and use it. That will come at an additional expense to my current clients and future clients, but that's something that I'll be setting it up for a lot of the clients who need that kind of thing, which will be really nice.
Well, that's
to
exciting.
Be able to have me be able to look at it for them too. I won't be able to see every single expense or like see like, oh, you spent this much money at Costco or this much money at GameStop. Why are you buying so many video games? Like I don't get to see that level of detail, but you get to get them by category as to how much is going in each thing.
Heck yeah.
So let me summarize the key points and then we'll get out of here, okay? So I want to reskip the 9 steps financial order of operations. Number 1, cover your deductibles, your highest deductible. Number 2, get your employer match, whether that be 401k, TSP, 403b, whatever you have. Number 3, take out your high interest debt. Number 4, start working on building up your emergency reserves, whether that be 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever is right for you, whatever lets you sleep well at night. Number 5, max out your Roth IRAs and your HSA if you're eligible for that. Number 6, max out your retirements through work or through all the other qualified expenses. Number 7, hyperaccumulation. You can save additional money into non-qualified accounts. You can save it wherever the heck you want to save it, under the mattress, whatever it is. Ideally, you're investing it though, not under the mattress. Step number 8, prepay future expenses, whether that be your students or your kids' student loans, whether that be future wedding, whether that be maybe a rental house that you might, or a second home you might want to buy in the future. And then step number 9, take out your low interest debt. After that, you have no more interest or you have no more debt. You have a bunch of money in the account and you go out and live your best life. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for learning. If you watched this far and you haven't subscribed, like what are we doing here? Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment in the comment bar. Let us know what we can do better for you guys so that we can continue to bring the best level of service to our listeners, because that's what we're all about.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we'll see you guys on Friday, and I hope you have a great week. Later, guys.
And don't forget about the free for the show.
That's right. Don't forget
there is a
about it.
fee for the show. If you like this podcast, and if you're listening this far, I bet you do. Go ahead and turn to the person next to you. Tell them about the Fi Guys podcast. That's how we're going to have this movement continue to grow, reach more people, reach more audiences, and give the doctrines of Fi as far as we can. So with that, I say later, and Fi bless you.
Bye, guys.
Later, guys.
Peace.
This video podcast is sponsored by Monzon Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monzonwealth.com.